It was the first week of September when Anna moved to the small town of Maplewood. The air was crisp with the promise of fall, and the leaves had just started to turn. Her new home was nestled on the edge of a dense forest, known to the locals as Silent Woods. They said the name came from the way the woods absorbed sound, making even the loudest noises seem distant. Anna loved the outdoors and looked forward to exploring the forest. On her first weekend, she packed a small backpack, grabbed her camera, and set off on a hike. The woods were beautiful, with tall trees that seemed to stretch forever into the sky. But as she ventured deeper, she noticed the silence the locals had mentioned. There were no birds singing, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, oppressive quiet. After a while, she stumbled upon an old, overgrown path. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but her curiosity got the better of her, and she followed it. The path wound deeper into the woods, the trees growing closer together until it was almost dark. That's when she saw it, a small, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. Anna hesitated, but something about the cabin drew her in. She approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open with a creak. Inside, the air was stale, and the room was filled with old, rotting furniture. A fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a large, dusty mirror. As she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her. Anna jumped, her heart racing, but when she turned to open the door, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and a soft whisper echoed through the cabin. "Why are you here?" the voice said, barely more than a breath. Anna spun around, her eyes darting around the room. She saw nothing but the old furniture and the mirror, but the whispering continued, growing louder. "You shouldn't have come." She backed away from the mirror, but as she did, she noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror didn't match the room. Instead of showing the cabin, it displayed a dark forest, and in the distance, she saw a figure, a woman in a long, tattered dress, her face obscured by shadow. The figure began to move toward the mirror, and as it did, the temperature in the cabin dropped even further. Anna's breath came out in white puffs as she watched, frozen in terror. The figure reached the edge of the mirror, and with a bone-chilling scream, it lunged out of the glass. Anna screamed and ran to the door, pounding on it with all her strength. The figure was behind her now, whispering in her ear, "Leave this place." Just as she was about to give up, the door flew open, and she stumbled out into the forest. She didn't stop running until she was back at her house, slamming the door behind her. She didn't go back to Silent Woods after that. In fact, she left Maplewood altogether a few days later. But sometimes, when she closes her eyes at night, she still hears the whispers, reminding her of what she saw in that cabin in the September woods. The small coastal town of Crestfall was known for its picturesque landscapes and the ominous storms that rolled in every September. For locals, these storms were a natural, if inconvenient, part of life. But to Emily, who had only recently moved into a secluded cottage on the outskirts of town, the storms felt different this year, more intense, more suffocating. By the sixth day of unrelenting rain, Emily was starting to feel the weight of isolation. The rain drummed incessantly against the windows, and the sky was a constant shade of gray. The cottage, usually a sanctuary of peace, now felt more like a prison. Late that night, Emily was abruptly awakened by a soft, steady knocking at her front door. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened, hoping it was just her imagination. But the knocking continued, 3 deliberate knocks, followed by silence. Emily hesitated before getting out of bed, every instinct telling her not to open the door. It was 2 a.m., and the storm outside was raging. Who could possibly be out in such weather? She grabbed her robe and cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, but there was no answer, just the relentless sound of the rain. When she opened the door, no one was there. The night was pitch black, the rain blurring the landscape, but something on the ground caught her eye, a small bundle wrapped in a soaking wet cloth. Emily's first thought was that it was a cruel prank, but curiosity got the better of her. She bent down and picked up the bundle, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was an old, tarnished locket. The metal was cold to the touch, and when she turned it over, she saw faint initials engraved on the back, M.H. Emily didn't recognize the locket or the initials, but something about it unsettled her. She brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table, deciding to deal with it in the morning. Back in bed, Emily tried to sleep, but her mind kept drifting back to the locket. Who left it? And why? As she was finally drifting off, she heard the knocking again, louder this time. Her heart leaped into her throat as she realized it wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from inside the house. Terrified, Emily got out of bed and crept toward the source of the sound. It led her back to the kitchen, where the knocking grew louder and more frantic. But when she entered the room, it suddenly stopped. The locket lay on the table, untouched, but now it seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her eyes never leaving the locket. Then, the knocking resumed, this time, it was right behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. The only sound was the rain beating against the windows. Panicking, Emily grabbed the locket, intending to throw it out, but the moment she touched it, a wave of cold washed over her. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. It felt as though something was watching her, something dark and malevolent. She dropped the locket, and as it hit the floor, the knocking stopped abruptly. Emily stood there, paralyzed with fear, waiting for the next sound. But the house was silent. Gathering her courage, she slowly bent down to pick up the locket. Just as her fingers brushed against it, the knocking returned, this time from the ceiling, the walls, the floor, as if the entire house was alive with the sound. She screamed and backed away, clutching her head to block out the noise, but it only grew louder, more insistent. The lights in the kitchen flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Then, as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. Emily stood there, shaking, as the silence descended once more. She knew she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She grabbed her coat and bolted for the door, leaving the locket behind on the cold, tile floor. She didn't stop running until she was in her car, the rain pouring down harder than ever. As she drove away, she could feel something was watching her, something that had been awakened by the locket. But she didn't look back, didn't dare stop. She just kept driving, wanting to get as far from Crestfall as possible. It wasn't until she was miles away, on the open highway, that she began to calm down. The rain had lessened, and the storm seemed to be finally breaking. Emily took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. But as she glanced in the rearview mirror, her blood ran cold. Hanging from the mirror was the locket, gently swinging back and forth. It hadn't been there before. She stared at it in horror, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't touch it, didn't even dare take her eyes off the road. She just kept driving, praying that whatever had haunted her in Crestfall wouldn't follow her. But deep down, Emily knew the truth. The locket wasn't just an object, it was a curse, one that had chosen her. And as long as she had it, she would never escape the storm. September in the small farming town of Elmswood was always a busy time. The fields were ripe with crops, and everyone in town pitched in to help with the harvest. It was a tradition, one that brought the community together. But there was one field on the outskirts of town that no one ever touched, the old Miller farm. The Millers had abandoned their land years ago, leaving behind a house in a vast field that was now overgrown with weeds. Rumor had it that something terrible had happened there one September night, but no one knew for sure. The field was said to be cursed, and the townsfolk avoided it at all costs. One evening, a group of teenagers, bored and looking for a thrill, decided to explore the Miller farm. Among them was Tom, who had always been skeptical of the town's superstitions. He convinced his friends to join him, thinking it would be a harmless adventure. They reached the farm just as the sun was setting. The house was a dark silhouette against the fiery sky, and the field was a sea of tall, dry grass. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the only sound was the rustling of the grass in the wind. "Let's check out the house," Tom suggested, leading the way. The others followed, though with some hesitation. The door to the house creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dusty, cobweb-filled interior. The floorboards groaned under their weight as they explored the first floor, finding nothing but old furniture and broken windows. Then they heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from upstairs. Tom, eager to prove there was nothing to fear, headed up the narrow staircase, his friends close behind. The scratching grew louder as they approached a closed door at the end of the hallway. Tom reached for the doorknob, and as he turned it, the door swung open on its own. Inside was a small bedroom, empty except for a bed and a large wardrobe. The scratching was coming from inside the wardrobe. Tom hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. He slowly opened the wardrobe door, revealing an old, tattered coat hanging inside. But as he reached out to touch it, something cold and wet brushed against his hand. He yanked his hand back, and the coat fell to the floor, revealing a hidden compartment in the back of the wardrobe. The scratching was louder now, almost frantic. Tom leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He pulled open the compartment, and his blood ran cold. Inside was a small, shriveled figure, its eyes wide with terror. It was no larger than a child, but its skin was a sickly gray, and its mouth was twisted into a silent scream. The figure reached out with bony fingers, and Tom stumbled back in horror. "Get out," a voice hissed from behind them. The group turned to see an old man standing in the doorway, his eyes wild with fear. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now, before it's too late." The teenagers didn't need to be told twice. They bolted out of the house, not stopping until they were far from the farm. Tom looked back once, and for a brief moment, he saw the figure from the wardrobe standing in the doorway, watching them leave. The next day, the town was abuzz with rumors of what the teenagers had seen. But the Miller farm remained untouched, its cursed field left to wither under the September sun. Years later, Tom would remember that night and wonder what had really happened on the Miller farm all those years ago. But one thing was certain, he would never go back. Love these stories? YouTube algorithm suggests that you would like to listen to these stories. Click on the video on the screen.